last week, the state of California passed its state budget. And many of you are like, why do we care? We only care about our individual budget in the self-determination program. Oh, no, no, no. You should very much care about the state budget. It is very, very important. And we're going to show you why. So I'm going to go to our next one, and I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers. Nina Spiegelman and I will be chiming in on some of the issues, but our main panelists today are Vivian Haun, Senior Staff Attorney at Disability Rights California, also an amazing sibling to a self-determination program participant, as well as a board member of Disability Voices United. Will Leiner, Managing Attorney for Disability Rights California, also an amazing sibling to a brother who is in the San Andreas Regional Center catchment area. And Mark Melanson, Executive Director of California Community Living Network. These are, everybody should know that Vivian, Will, and Mark are like joined at the hip with DVU. Like, we talk to them multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times in a day. We have co-sponsored bills together this year, and they are, I love them so much. They're like my family. So I want to thank Vivian, Will,
siblings.
and Mark.
They're our siblings.
They are. They're our work siblings. And so thank you guys. We love you. And we have the A team here, the A team today. All right. So first, let me just do a little description of the budget for people who may not understand it. So the state has a budget that works on the fiscal year, meaning the budget started July 1st, 5 days ago, and it ends on June 30th in 2023. The process begins in January when Governor Newsom presents his version of what the budget should be. Then the legislature, the Assembly, and the Senate, they have hearings on it in February, March, and again in May. And then on May 10th, the government issues what he calls a revised budget. You may have heard the term, if you actually care to listen to these things, called the May Revise or the May Revised Budget. That is because they get a better sense in May of what the tax revenue is going to be and how much money they have to spend. So sometimes the governor can increase his budget, and sometimes he actually has to decrease the amount of money he's spending. They then go into heavy negotiations with the governor, with the legislature, and then the legislature finally passes the budget sometime in early to mid-June, and the governor has to sign it by the 30th, or else people don't get, the legislators don't get paid. So they always pass something now by that time. There used to be a time when the budget would go on and on and on for months, but now they always pass it. So what we're going to be describing to you right now actually is real law. I know that we talked about this a couple of months ago, and everything we were saying was a possibility. Everything we're now telling you is actually really real, okay? All right, so let's go to the next one. All right, so the first thing, so we're kind of talking about many different pieces of the budget, and we're talking about them in basic themes. So the first theme is directly the impact on the self-determination program. So in the budget, which is now law, the fees for your financial management services are no longer in your individual budget. The regional centers are now required to pay the full costs of your monthly FMS fees. And so for those of you who are already in the SDP, that means that your budget will increase the amount of money that is the cost of your FMSs. Okay, so if you're spending $150 a month on FMSs, then that cost will go back into your budget. So this is really, really great news, particularly for those folks who have very small budgets. The regional centers are going to tell you, we have no idea how this is going to work. That is definitely true. They're going to get some instructions, some directive from DDS to explain how this works. And I just want to let you know it's a cost of $7.2 million per year, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not, because you're going to start hearing about what they're spending on other things in the budget, and you'll realize that this is a drop in the bucket for the developmental disability system, but we're so appreciative that it's happened, and we want to all thank. Oh, it's effective when? And it was effective July 1st. It was effective 5 days ago, everybody. With the state budget, it goes into effect immediately. So even, I know that the FMSs, I don't know if any of them are on today, but the FMSs probably don't even know exactly how they're supposed to be billing regional centers right now, how it's all going to work. But the instructions will come out soon, and we'll be able to go back and revise our spending plans to reflect that increased amount of money. It could be as high as $1,850, I believe, is the highest amount. All right. Okay, moving on. And then just as the other piece that's in the state budget around the self-determination program is that the state council was actually supposed to deliver a report. They were supposed to do it in cooperation with Disability Rights California and the University Centers for Excellence. They were supposed to submit this report even last year, and they postponed it until this year in December, and now they're postponing it again till June 30th, 2023. That is the reason that they gave for extending the report is because there are so few people in the self-determination program for them to survey that they want to get more and more people in the program so they get a much better sense of how things are going. And the reason most of you are not really caring about this, we should care about this, because the reason the state council is postponing this is because there's not enough people in the program. And why are there not enough people in the program? It's because there are so many barriers to participation. So I just wanted to let people know that this is happening, okay? All right, so now we're gonna move away from the self-determination program directly and start talking about some other pieces of the budget, and I'm gonna turn it over to Will.
Thank you, Judy, and hi everyone. I'm Will Leiner with Disability Rights California, and thank you everyone for sharing this space with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about fair hearing reform, but I have to say that these changes are it's a major win for our community and for everyone, including many of you who have demanded changes to a process that has felt unfair, that's felt unsafe and inequitable. This is a big win. There's going to be many changes to the fair hearing process in the coming year. Not all of them will happen right away. I'm planning on touching on the major changes and when they're supposed to happen. We could really devote a whole SDP Connect to this topic. So just bear with me while I run through everything fairly quickly, because I also want to leave some time for my friends Vivian and Mark to present on their topics as well. I've organized things by when they take effect, but the first change that's happening should actually start this month. Starting this month, regional centers now have a timeline to comply with hearing decisions. They need to comply within 30 days. And I think for those of you who have been through hearings, and if you came out of it, on the good side, winning your hearing, regional centers don't implement the hearing decision right away. Time passes, you're not quite sure what to do. Well, now they've got 30 days. And if they can't implement the hearing decision within 30 days, to let TDS know. And if you're unhappy with how a regional center is complying with the hearing decision, now you have the option to go straight to DDS with a complaint. So none of that stuff existed a month ago. It now all exists today. Some other changes come, major one, starting in October. Regional centers don't get to bring lawyers with them to informal meetings, to mediations, or hearings if the person served doesn't have a lawyer. Let me say this one again, because I think it's that important. No lawyers for regional centers served doesn't have a lawyer. This will be a major in the balance of power and the dynamic of how hearings are run. The vast majority of changes, though, will go into effect next year in March 2023. Right now, when someone receives a notice of action, they only have 30 days to decide to file for a fair hearing. That's not a whole lot of time, and there's a lot of stress and thinking that needs to go into that decision. Well, starting March 2023, people will have 60 days to decide. People will now be able to request informal meetings or mediation without also having to request. This is another good thing. Hearings are stressful and they just, right? And right now, the only way to get mediation or an informal hearing is to also ask for a hearing. Now you have to make that choice. There are also changes to the mediation process. Mediation, it's a process where a neutral, unbiased person is supposed to get everyone together to help them reach an agreement. Right now, mediation is optional, but starting next March, it will be mandatory for regional centers if the person requests one. We think that it's a better outcomes for people. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about hearing preparation. Current law says that it treats both sides equally. It says that both sides have to exchange all of their documents and a list of witnesses before the hearing. That's going to change too. Regional centers are now going to be required to provide a position statement, more information about the facts that they're relying on, the law that they're using, what they plan to say at hearing, the arguments they'll be using. They have to provide that in a written position statement 2 business days before the hearing in the person's preferred language, as well as copies of all the documents they'll use at the hearing and a list of witnesses the regional center will call. People served, they're not going to have that same requirement. If you're not represented by an attorney, the only thing that you need to send to the regional center before the hearing is a list of witnesses that you plan to call and copies of, we'll call them professional assessments or reports. That's the language that the law uses. So think about if you have a case where you're trying to establish regional center eligibility and you have a report by a professional, that's something that you'll have to give to the regional center beforehand. Or if you have an independent assessment supporting the need for a service, you may have to provide that to the regional center beforehand. Everything else you can bring to the hearing, or if you want, you can give it to the regional center before the hearing too. Next slide, please. A few more things on the conduct of hearing officers will also change. Under current law, the hearing officer kind of expects everyone to, expects both sides to present their case to the best of their ability. This gives regional centers a major advantage. Regional centers are practiced in pitting on cases, and for many people, they may do it once, maybe more than once, but usually once in their lifetime. So starting in March, hearing officers will be required to, the law says, fairly develop the record and create an environment where all facts, favorable facts, unfavorable facts, are all brought to the surface. Instead of automatically expecting the person to know what to say or do at a hearing. And we call this engaged neutrality. Hearing decisions, it seems like maybe it should have been happening all along, but it's really important. They need to be written in the person's preferred language. People lose hearings, that happens all the time. And right now, the only way to challenge a hearing decision is by going to Superior Court, which usually requires a lawyer to do. But now there's going to be a process where people can request something called reconsideration. It's kind of like a second opinion if they think that the hearing officer made a mistake. And if someone does make the difficult decision to file an appeal in Superior Court, well, 90 days is pretty short to do so. That's current law. Now people have 180 days. And I'll just say the last change is people served by the system, they're going to have more of a voice in the hearing process and how it's run. Hearing officer trainings, they're going to start including information about how to support people with disabilities to fully participate in their hearings. And lastly, there's also going to be a stakeholder advisory committee that gets established, and that needs to include people served by the system and their families. But the idea is that this stakeholder committee would meet regularly and provide recommendations directly to the hearing office about how hearings can be improved. And I know I went through these pretty quickly. these are the highlights, the major changes. There's going to be a lot more to come around rolling out information about all these changes that many of you fought so hard for. But those are the 3 slides on fair hearing reform.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to Vivian now. I've seen some questions in the chat, everybody. We will definitely get to your questions at the end and we'll go back over them. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. You will also get a chance to raise your hand and ask your questions live. But I'm going to turn to Vivian now.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. This slide is short but sweet. Unfortunately, this is something that you've already been doing anyway. This is one of the things that got put into place when the pandemic hit, and it was originally supposed to expire last year, 2021 on June 30th. And this is the ability to have IPP and IFSP meetings virtually and remotely, because by statute, the Leiner Act tells us that these meetings should be taking place in person. Typically, that was the requirement. So last year, they agreed to extend that option out by 1 year. The expiration date was June 30th, 2022. They have extended it out by 1 year again. To be honest, we did try to reach out to the department to see if we could just make this a permanently available option. I think they are open to discussing it, but for various reasons, for right now, there's just another 1 year extension, and we will circle back again next year and try to see if we can make that permanent.
Wonderful.
So good news on that front.
Really good news. All right, so moving away from sort of IPPs and meetings at regional centers, we're now moving to other ways that people can resolve concerns that they have with regional centers. Go ahead, Will, talk about this.
Thanks, Judy. So DDS is creating a new division called the Division of Community Assistance and Resolution. It'll be a division with 20 new positions. And one of the primary purposes of this division will be to run a statewide ombudsperson program. So the ombuds program will no longer be just for self-determination participants. The role of this position is to report to the DDS director to help DDS learn about and identify trends in our system. This position is supposed to provide people served with neutral access to information and interact with regional centers to do their best to help facilitate resolutions of what the DDS proposal calls as consumer issues. When I read this proposal, the structure it's a little unusual. Most ombudspersons in most agencies have what I'll call as independent authority to conduct investigations or help people resolve problems. So we're gonna, kind of take a wait and see approach to see how this new position will help people in the system and help them solve their problems. More broadly, this division will also manage whistleblower complaints, which are a special type of complaints that anyone can file directly with DDS if they believe that some sort of illegal activity is occurring. I like to think of this as the if you see something, say something complaint option. So now there's going to be dedicated people within this division to manage those complaints.
I like that. If you see something, say something. I hadn't thought about that. Excellent.
Thanks, Judy. And lastly, DDS is also proposing, or they will also be splitting apart their quality assurance and risk management programs, which and DDS has said is necessary to help promote quality outcomes in our system. And both of these offices will also be part of this new division, the Division of Community Assistance and Resolutions.
Wonderful. Okay, moving on. This is just a quickie, everybody. So we're moving to now the next theme, which is around equity and sort of reducing racial and ethnic disparities. Every year for the last 6 years, DDS has provided grants to regional centers and community-based organizations of $11 million annually for just this year, this coming next year, because there's a lot of money in the budget. They were giving out 22 million. So instead of 11 million, it's $22 million in grants. So if you are a self-advocate or family-led organization who works in communities that are traditionally underserved, we really encourage you to look at potentially applying for an equity grant, because there will be double the amount of money to be given away this year. And now moving on to some services that are more specific that benefit all people, but are really targeted towards reducing racial and ethnic disparities. So Will, this is yours.
Thanks, Judy. So let's talk about supports for adults who live with their families. This is really important. I hear all the time, I was just at a TDS work group meeting, we were all talking about the housing crisis, and that there's a housing crisis, and there is. There's not enough accessible, affordable housing out there. There's not enough residential facilities. There's not enough places for people to live, and that's all true. But it's also true that many people in our system are already housed. They live with their families, and when that's the person in their family, it should be supported beyond the typical combination of respite and IHSS that most people in our system receive. That's what coordinated family support services is all about. This is supposed to start as a pilot project using additional federal dollars that TDS requested last year to support an expansion of different types of home and community-based services. TDS has said that they intend for this service to be similar to supported living services, a service that's only available to adults who live outside the family home in their own homes or apartments. And for those of you who aren't familiar with supported living services, or SLS, think of it as a wraparound service that has two components, both a direct support component and also assistance with coordinating services that's really designed to fit within the context of a person's day-to-day life, either at home or in the community. And we think that TDS did a really good thing here to make, coordinated support services, to make a support in the services real for adults who choose to live with their families. This project is also supposed to focus on improving equitable access to services and supports and reducing racial and ethnic disparities. And this makes sense too, since the majority of people who live in the family home are people of color. TDS is supposed to issue program directives and regulations to implement this service, but not before it engages with stakeholders to inform key elements about how this service should be designed. So it's not here today. The service will be here soon. And we certainly look forward to working with the community to also hear and engage, like what's important about a different type of service in the context of the family home of a person. I think we're all, at least from DRC and many others, really eager to engage with TDS through this stakeholder process and making sure that this is done right through their directives and their regulations.
Thank you. All right, Vivian, you're next.
Hi, so I am really excited about this one. For those of you who aren't familiar with Tailor Day Services, I'll give you just a quick summary of what Tailor Day Services is. It is a service type, and this was a service that came into being around the time of the recession, like 2009 back then, and is originally conceived of as a cost-saving measure. So by design, it was always supposed to be really small and only available under certain limits. So I'll tell you what those limits are. But Tailor Day Services are really meant to address a few things. It can be used for employment, post-secondary education, self-advocacy, and community integration skills. And it is often used by a number of providers for employment-related supports like job development. Some people use it for job coaching or other related supports. It's a very flexible service, and it's frequently provided on a one-to-one basis, completely customized and designed around the individual's needs, which is great, right? The downside was that by statute, when it was created, it was very limited. It was only available for just a handful of hours per month, and it could only be offered in place of or instead of traditional employment services or a traditional day program. So you couldn't have both at the same time, right? So that made it really limited, and there were a lot of people who just weren't able to access Tailor Day Services as a result. So in this year's budget, to DDS's credit, the department decided to expand access to Tailor Day Services. So now TDS can be provided for the first time in conjunction with, meaning at the same time, you can have it in your IPP along with traditional employment services or a traditional day program, which is a big change because that will make it much more available to a much broader range of people. The new language also changes the rate structure for service providers who provide Tailor Day Services. Any provider who has been providing Tailor Day Services is going to be able to hang on to the rate that they had previously in June, which is a good thing. And any provider who is brand new to Tailor Day Services and wants to get in and get vendored for that, there's a very specific rate that they will have. And that's important too, because in the previous statute, they weren't able to earn very much from or get paid very much. So this is good because it will allow providers who do Tailor Day Services to really be able to get into it. So that in a nutshell is what Tailor Day Services is all about. And I'm really excited for this because I think that this will really make a lot of, this will potentially do a lot for those of you who are interested in post-secondary education, employment. There's a lot of creative stuff we can do here. So more to come.
Yay. All right, Mark, now we're finally getting to hear from Mark, but you're going to hear a lot from him now on the back end.
Hi, everybody. Mark Melanson, Executive Director of the California Community Living Network. Judy and Nina, thanks so much for the great introduction. CCLN has so appreciated the collaboration that we have with DBU and DRC. So remote supports pilots, wow. If the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to do anything, it was to better use technology. So what this initiative proposes is a $5 million pilot program aimed at developing remote supports using technology systems to increase consumer independence and, when chosen and safe, reduce in-person and round-the-clock services.
So Mark, I just need you to slow down a little bit for our interpreters, please.
Sure. Sorry about that. So when we think of the technology that we're all using, how can that technology be woven into a support for somebody with a developmental disability? The first thing that comes to my mind is video phones for people who are deaf. When I first started in the system, we used what was called TTYs, which was a typing system for people to communicate who were deaf. And video phones were really revolutionary for folks to be able to communicate who were deaf with their peers, their support staff, their friends, their family, all those things. So this really offers, and I think of Alexa, I have Alexa, she's probably going to talk back to me right now, but how can we better use technology in how people receive supports? This offers a $5 million pilot program to demonstrate, really see what's out there for technology and how it can be woven into supports for people. This also would call for a stakeholder group to hear about how the project's going, advise along the way, and really help report out on how technology has been useful in those support systems.
I see a new stakeholder group for Tim Jin in his future. Sorry, Tim, you got to be on that one.
I support that 100%. So rate acceleration for traditional service providers. You've probably heard a lot about the rate study and last year's budget in 2021 approved implementing that rate study. So what happened this year was the initiative to speed that up a little bit. So what was proposed to be an increase for traditional service providers on July 1st, 2023 has now been moved up to January 1st, 2023. The initiative requires that the fully funded rate models be implemented by July 1st, 2024. The majority of the rate increases have been specified to go towards direct support professional wages. And what has been defined as a direct support professional is somebody that spends 75% of their time providing direct services. So beginning July 1st, 2023 would also require a vendor to be in compliance with home and community-based services final rule. I know you've all heard a lot about that too, because Judy and I do talk about that a lot. Or to implement a corrective action plan to come into compliance with the HCBS final rule. To be eligible for the Quality Incentive Program April 1st rate increase already in effect. So what that is quality incentives, payments to providers for improving the quality of their services.
So I'm just going to take a minute to talk a bit about how this relates to the self-determination program, because Mark is the expert on the rate acceleration piece, and I understand how it sort of relates to what you all are here to hear. So at this point, your individual budgets are based on the rates that existed when you went into the self-determination program. So if you've been in for 3 years, like my son has, the rates are what was 3 years ago. Even though the rates have gone up this year, we have not been able to get the same rates as what people in the traditional system have. We have raised this concern repeatedly with DDS, specifically Nancy Bargman. She has said that she has made no decisions on it, but at this point, regional centers are not being allowed to recalculate people's budgets based on the new rates. Obviously, we think this is highly discriminatory. It particularly discriminates against people like my friend Howard, who uses a service provider that is vendored in the traditional system, but uses them in the self-determination program. And when their rates go up in the traditional system, he does not have the money in his budget to be able to raise those rates at the same level. So obviously that's a very big problem for a lot of people who are using traditional service providers in self-determination. It's also just plain a problem because, you know, we shouldn't be, our rates should not be frozen in time in the day that the day that we enter the self-determination program. The rates should be equitable regardless of whether you're in the self-determination program or in the traditional system. So we will continue to advocate for that. And we're really hoping that we can succeed on this. And we're hoping to have meetings about this in the near future. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that the home and community-based services rule, which DVU, along with our colleagues, are going to be spending a huge amount of time on this because it goes into effect for the traditional system in March of 2023. But you in the self-determination program are already having to follow those new rules. So you are in great shape and don't need to worry about that for now. Okay, moving along now to other things in the traditional system that will definitely impact people in this self-determination program as well. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so training stipends and internship program. The training stipends is something that we were very excited about. It provides up to two $500 training stipends with an additional $150 for taxes and administration for direct support professionals, DSPs. These stipends are also available for DSPs in the self-determination program. So what that means is a direct support professional will be able to take a training and receive a $500 stipend for taking that training. And they can do that 2 times. We have seen such a workforce shortage well before the pandemic, but has been really gotten worse with the pandemic. So this is really an opportunity to attract people to our workforce, as well as reward people for trainings, for taking trainings. So we're real excited about this training stipends. Internships for workers who provide direct care services implements a 3-month training and internship program intended to establish an entry point into direct support professional career paths. This, while doesn't have a lot of information in the budget, still needs to be figured out how it will be implemented. Will provide a paid internship in the field of direct support profession. Again, to really attract people to our field, give them a great start in their career as a direct support professional, and be able to pay the workers who are in that internship program. This also includes funding for 7 Department of Developmental Services headquarters positions to support these efforts, to address the challenges in recruiting and retraining direct support professionals and regional center service coordinators. So really these 3 bullet points really are efforts to address a real workforce shortage in the direct support profession.
And just to make it very clear to everyone that those training stipends are definitely available to all your direct staff, your direct care staff. If they go through this training, I plan on sending both of my son's staff through this training so that they receive the stipends, and hopefully they will learn something too. It's not just to get the stipend. I'm hoping that there will be something useful that comes out of that. And we will keep you posted when we hear when these things begin, and because I'm sure nothing's going to happen quickly. This is DDS.
And I see someone's asking, how do they apply?
Yep.
Again, those details have yet to be brought forward, but certainly I'm sure there'll be an SDP Connect when that process has been outlined.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. Everything takes a while, sadly. All right, Vivian, now we're moving to how regional centers benefited from the budget this year. Go ahead, Vivian.
Thanks, Judy. So one of the things that regional centers have been advocating for in the budget for some time now is additional funding to reduce the caseload ratios that their service coordinators have, because for many years, what they've been talking about is the number of cases that the average service coordinator has in their caseload, and it has really been higher than it should be for a number of years, or higher than what the ratio should be as defined in law. And so I think after a number of efforts of just like one-time funding, which they felt was not really enough to keep up with the growing need, this year they got through the budget a change in the formula itself, the formula that's used to fund how much money regional centers get to pay service coordinators and to basically to staff them. So because there's going to be a change in the formula itself, I think that this should put regional centers in a better position financially, because now we won't get into all the details of how the math works and the exact formula and all the things that it's based on. But I think the critical thing to know is that going forward, there will be, I think, a growing and steady stream of funding dedicated to hiring more service coordinators, and with the goal of making sure that that caseload ratio stays at the rate that it was intended to be at. So hopefully that will we will start to see some results from that in the not too distant future.
Right. And as I've said in a previous SDP Connect, I mean, regional centers have really been flooded with a huge amount of new resources. So has DDS has added tons of new staff. And so for us, our 2023 at Disability Voices United, we're calling the No More Excuses year. So that it's like, you've gotten what you need, you've gotten all these new resources. Now we want to make sure that people with disabilities and their family members are getting what they need. They're getting the services, they're getting the help with accessing school services and health services and other things. So we will be right on top of that. Okay, hold on, come on, go to the next one, please. Why is it frozen? What's happening? All of a sudden, this whole thing is frozen. Hold on. I apologize, people. I may need to, I may need to reload it because it's stuck. I don't know why. All right, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing. Well, let's see. Can I do it here? No. All right, I'm going to just stop sharing for a second. I apologize, everybody. I'm going to reload I don't know why it did that. Yes, it froze. Force reload. Sorry, everybody. We'll be back in just a moment. I will go to present. And here we go. Moving very slowly. I apologize. Oh man, it's slow. Sorry, everybody. That's never happened. I don't know what that is about, but good to remember. Canva is not perfect. Maybe we could take this, can we just take this one question that, that Andrea is asking in the chat? Vivian, she's asking, are you saying there isn't an exact number because it's based on the individual needs, or is there an approximate ratio?
That's a good question. There is I want to say like a target ratio that's actually spelled out in the law. It's not a requirement per se, it's more like an aspirational goal or like an intent where, the law has set forward what it thinks or what the legislature at the time thought would be ideal, right? In terms of what a minimal caseload ratio would be. And for many years now, the ratio has been larger than that for a variety of reasons. But it is spelled out. I wish I could give you the exact number off the top of my head, but I don't want to say anything in case I get it slightly wrong, but it is laid out. But yes, I see in the chat that there is, yes, there has been some coverage of that lately. There has been an audit report that came out from the state of California from the auditor's office that discussed this issue among a number of other issues. But again, now that funding has been allocated to address this problem specifically, we look forward to seeing, again, the results and seeing what happens if and when the caseload ratios do drop.
Well, I just want to thank Kira for saving us here because I could not get the private presenter view to load. So we are now using the public PDF. So thank you, dear. We appreciate that so much. So I do not have the presenter view, so folks need to remind me who's doing which slide. I'm pretty sure this is Vivian. Is this you?
You're on tuition reimbursement.
Oh, yeah, yes. So that's you, Mark. Sorry.
I think you missed a slide before
Did
that.
I?
Yep. That's
No,
Vivian.
it's this one.
Yep. Regional Center, and that is Vivian.
Oh, no, but Vivian already just did it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. And now is you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
So this initiative, tuition reimbursement for the service coordinators, $30 million in the budget, establishes a tuition reimbursement program for regional center service coordinator staff pursuing advanced degrees in health and human services related fields. What that means is that service coordinators will be able to take additional college classes that will be reimbursed by their employer, the regional center.
So I put in this slide, we put that it's $30 million, because remember back at the very early slide, we said that putting FMS fees in outside of the budget was $7 million. I needed you to understand that there's a whole lot of money that's going to a whole lot of things that are not services directly for people served by regional centers. And so, this is what we do here at DVU is we fight to make sure that people and their families are given what they need, whether it's help with other service systems or whether it's getting services directly from regional centers. And so this is why we have to join together, because people in the regional center system cannot get tuition paid for. It's prohibited. Tuition is a different, it's called a generic resource. And even if you want to go to graduate school, you cannot get your tuition paid for. So, maybe now that it's being provided to service coordinators, we can go back and fight for this for our regional center clients. All right, moving on, I will scroll down to the safety net plan. This is Vivian, is this you? Sorry, oh, Will, sorry. See, this is the problem. I need the other plan, I need it. Okay, go ahead, Will.
Thanks, Judy. So DDS developed what they call a safety net plan as part of its decision to close most of its segregated state-operated institutions. It's a decision for which I and we all give DDS a lot of credit. So this safety net plan led to a massive amounts of resource development to serve people who would otherwise be forced into institutions. But over the past few years, we've seen a lot of growth in what I'll call our community settings that look nice on the inside. They have wide hallways and manicured yards and granite countertops, but in reality, they have many of the trappings of an institution, like locked fences, alarms on doors, and most troubling to us, the use of physical restraints in these settings. And we also still continue to see people who are getting stuck in emergency rooms, stuck in private institutions, because there's still a lack of community capacity. The legislature has been really concerned with these dynamics, and so have we. So, long way of getting at, DDS will now be required to update the safety net plan that it developed, a few years ago in a different time to address many of these current and emerging issues. They need to update the safety net plan in consultation with stakeholders, and they're going to need to start to provide regular reporting to the legislature around the safety net plan resources that need to be developed to meet the needs of everybody in our system.
Thank you, Will. I have no idea who's doing any of these, so I'm just gonna scroll down. Is this Vivian? I can't remember. I think it was you, Vivian.
I can't quite remember either, but I will take it. So there were a number of changes this year to some of the language around early start. And this year's budget really focused more on a few components of early start. One of those is eligibility. So they added some language to the eligibility language that specify that fetal alcohol syndrome specifically could be a condition. One of the conditions that could be considered for eligibility for early start. They added a little bit of language that talked about how to more specifically describe communication delays when it comes to eligibility. But I think these are not earth-shattering changes, but I think that language just got a little bit more specific than it had been previously, and hopefully will be helpful to the little ones who have fetal alcohol syndrome. It has been difficult, I think, in the past for them to sometimes become eligible. So hopefully this will help them in those efforts. With regard to early start transition, I think the upshot of the changes that you see here bullet pointed is that DDS is going to get more staff, and regional centers are going to get more staff actually at each regional center to really focus on kids making the transition from having early start services that are really coordinated through the regional centers at that age when responsibility for their programming shifts over to local education agencies, usually school districts. So the idea is that there will be more staff now at regional centers that will specialize in these transitions and will be more available to be liaisons to school district staff and also to really work more closely with families who have children at this age and provide more resources.
Thank you. And I've now got the other one up on my screen, so now I know who to call up. Okay, so for the next one is me. Okay, so, everything we do at DVU is trying to teach all of folks with disabilities and family members about the way public policy works. And so, I'm always like the expert here, but I'm really not the expert because I learn something every day. And I just learned just this week that there is this whole section of the budget where people get to ask a legislator to put in a special appropriation just for their group. Sometimes it's a private company, sometimes it's a city, sometimes it's a nonprofit organization. And that specific amount is given to that organization without any sort of budget hearing, without any process of what's called competitive bidding, where maybe there's a different organization that wants to compete for that same grant. I learn something new every day. And there is this long list that around 1 million issues. It's not just on disability issues, it's around parks and roads and bridges and all kinds of things. But there's 3 that happened that were put in place that are in the developmental disability community, because I'm here to teach you all. You all can make a decision about whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea, but I'm just here to present the information. So first, there was an appropriation of $2 million to the California Policy Center for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. You may be saying, who is that? I've never heard of them. That's because they were just founded a few months ago. And they were founded by a former Senate pro tem, like a president pro tem of the Senate, very powerful person who wants to help people with developmental disabilities. And he has created this policy center, and they have gotten $2 million to develop strategies around employment. So they're getting that money. DDS has to give them that money, and no one else, none of you other people who do great work around employment are able to get any of that money. So, I just find that the way this system works to be very problematic. Also, $9 million is going to the organization called ETA, which is an organization based in Los Angeles who is building a very large inclusive apartment building in Los Angeles, where they're going to have set-asides, like special places for people with developmental disabilities to be able to live. So they got $9 million there. And then finally, $250,000 to the organization called Exceptional Minds, which is located in Los Angeles. It is, somebody's writing it is not vendored with regional centers. That's not true. It actually is vendored with some regional centers and not others. I know at mine, Westside Regional Center has vendored it. But they have they do animation and graphic design training for people on the autism spectrum. And so I just want to keep people aware of what's happening in the budget. All right, we also got some good news on SSI, and that's Mark.
Yeah, supplemental security income, supplemental state supplementary payments, approves 1 year acceleration of the increase to restore SSP to 2009 levels, but moves up the implementation date earlier. From January 1, 2023 to from January 1, 2024 to January 1, 2023 implementation date. The increase is projected to bring maximum SSI SSP grant levels to $1,123 per month for individuals, about $39 per month, and $1,940 per month for couples. The bill also requires that they display how the grants are faring against cost of living over time, monitoring the status of the grants and their ongoing purchasing power, and they do not receive a statutory cost of living adjustment. So it's not automatically going up each year. So that display will show that data.
Yeah, so for those of you who are adults who receive SSI, you will be getting an increase in your monthly payments of about $39. So that's a small amount of money, but it's meaningful. And so I know a lot of groups really fought hard for that increase. Okay, the next one is a real quick one by Vivian.
So this is quite a bit of money for something that is a really significant need in the IDD community, which is dental care. As many of you know, it is really challenging to find dentists and dental practices who know how to serve people with IDD. And this has been a concern for some time. So in this year's budget, there is now $15 million over 2 years to support building what they call specialty dental clinics to increase access to oral health. So there are a number of these clinics already that are primarily based at universities or colleges, primarily in more urban areas, right? Like we have some here in Los Angeles where I am, but unfortunately they're few and far between. They're not very accessible throughout the state, and they often have very long waiting lists. So this $50 million will be given now in grants or as grants for the purpose of building more of these facilities. So hopefully that will ease some of the waiting lists that currently exist. I don't know how long it will take, right, to build these clinics and get them online. These will be, I think, separate dental facilities. Again, these aren't going to be community-based dental facilities. They will be separate facilities just for people with disabilities. But again, this is such a huge need. So we will see how this one goes, and hopefully there will be more capacity in the system soon.
Thank you. So we now have time for questions. So I'll stop sharing. I know that was quite a long presentation, but as you saw, there was a lot in the budget. There really was a lot of changes. That's because there's a lot of money. Right now, there was a $68 billion surplus in the state budget. And so lots of groups got lots of money that normally wouldn't get money. So, it's very exciting on our end. So we're going to open it up to questions. Ed, I know that there's been a ton of questions in the chat, so I'm going to go to you first. And if folks want to ask a question verbally, go ahead and use the raise hand feature by going down to reactions and clicking on raise hand, and I can call on you and allow you to unmute yourself. So
Sure.
go ahead, Ed.
Our first question is from Alfredo, And he asks, referring to the funds that you were discussing towards the beginning of the presentation, this money, is it only for clients of the self-determination program?
I believe you are talking about the FMS. Yes, only people in the self-determination program use FMSs, because I believe I saw that question come in around that time. Many of the slides we presented are beneficial for all people with developmental disabilities, and in some cases, all people with disabilities. But anything related to the self-determination program only benefits those individuals.
Thank you, Judy. My next question is from Christiana. She says, I'm curious who will represent the regional center, if not a lawyer, at fair hearing.
So that's a question for Will or Vivian.
Yeah, I can take this question. Good question. So some regional centers currently use lawyers, others don't. And for the regional centers that don't use lawyers, they're typically represented by internal staff, sometimes with the title of, hearing specialist or appeal specialist. So it won't be somebody with a lawyer, but it will be somebody likely within a regional center whose job it is to do fair hearings for the regional center.
Got it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to add to that we've heard from the community, particularly the Integrated Community Collaborative, who are the folks who brought these concerns to our attention, and that they remain concerned that even if the regional centers can't hire an outside lawyer, that they will still have somebody like a paralegal or somebody who has tremendous experience going in to these fair hearings. And so that's where we agree that that's a concern, but that's where you have to look at the other changes that Will presented. These changes are really required to even the playing field. And so we think that all of these changes combined will make a dramatic difference in the ability of people to get something out of fair hearings. And by the way, thank you to all of you for your support. So many of you wrote letters, so many of you made phone calls to get that bill passed or to get this into the budget. Our bill around fair hearing, by the way, is still moving forward. There are still some pieces of our bill that didn't get into the budget. And so we'll keep you informed on what that looks like over time, over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Judy. I have an anonymous question that's sort of the opposite of what we just addressed. It's an interesting angle. The question asker wants to know what happens if a parent is an attorney and maybe has conservatorship of the participant. What if they argued that they're not acting as an attorney? Would the regional center still try and bring in an attorney because they hold a license?
Will?
That's a really good question, and I didn't address that in the points. And I have the new language in front of me, so I'm going to read it, then we can talk about it. So the new law effective, I think it's October, says, unless the claimant is themselves an attorney licensed to practice law in California, or unless the claimant will have an attorney licensed to practice law in California in attendance, the regional center can't bring an attorney. So, the first part of this really centers on the claimant and whether they're an attorney or not. I think it's so ambiguous about what it means for the claimant to have an attorney licensed to practice law in attendance. And I think that that's something, if a family member is an attorney, I think there's a distinction between whether that person is representing the claimant or whether it's a witness or supporting the claimant, but the claimant is the person served by our system. But I think that's one of those things and nuances where we're going to kind of have to see how it plays out when these kind of real world scenarios come up and how the regional centers treat them.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you. I have another anonymous question. So do the FMS fees now covered by the regional center include the employer's burden percentage?
It's a great question. It does not. So there's FMS fees that are monthly that are just for the efforts of the FMS to pay for, to write your checks and to do, pay your bills. the employer burdens are the pieces that you are required by labor law to provide, to pay Social Security taxes, to pay the federal and state employer burden income taxes. So you are not, you're not going to get around that. Remember that the employer burden piece only happens in the co-employer model. So if you're in the sole employer model, you are just paying per month for your FMS fees. So always remember those when you're just selecting which model.
Thank you, Judy. I have another anonymous question. What direct support or assistance will be available to clients to go through the fair hearing process as a result of this bill?
Will or Vivian?
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure, Vivian. The question is, what direct support assistance will be available to clients to go through the fair hearing process?
Yeah, I mean, the bill was, the budget is silent on that. It does not provide the person with a lawyer or even a reimbursement of a lawyer if you win your case, like in special education law. But what it does try to do is to say we're even, the playing field is even. So if the regional center has a fair hearing officer who's a lawyer, that fair hearing officer cannot show up at the fair hearings anymore because they are a lawyer. You may have a fair hearing officer who's very skilled in Lanterman Act law stuff. And so you are not going to be able to get a lawyer. I mean, as always, I mean, Vivian can talk about the client's rights advocates. I know they're certainly available to assist you as well. Vivian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, you covered most of it, Judy. There is nothing in the budget that provides any additional legal support, direct legal support, if that's what is being asked, unfortunately. But again, I think the hope is that even without an attorney, because the vast majority of people are going to continue to be representing themselves at hearing. So one of the things that we hope will make the process a little bit easier, we know it'll still be hard, but a little bit friendlier and more accessible, is to change the way the hearings are run, primarily to change the way ALJs treat and regard people who are representing themselves and aren't attorneys, right? So a little, I definitely would not call it direct support, but the idea is that starting very soon, ALJs will start getting new training around the concept that Will mentioned earlier, engage neutrality. You can Google it. But hopefully the idea is that the ALJs will now be friendlier and will conduct hearings in a manner that recognizes that people, don't have law degrees, and may not know like exactly how to do things or when or how. And the ALJs are now supposed to be more helpful. They can't make your arguments for you. They can't prove your case for you, but they can be a lot more helpful in explaining what's happening, what's expected of you, and what is happening as things are in process, and should be giving a lot more help in that regard. So that's one thing.
I'll add one more thing, Vivian, which further questions in the chat. So sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but there are a few questions that asked, well, can the regional center deny mediation? And under these new changes, a regional center can't deny mediation anymore. They have to accept it. It's mandatory for the regional center. Today, they can reject it, but in March 2023, they have to accept it. And that, in combination with the fact that people can essentially request mediation only without having to file for a hearing at the same time. These are other ways to get to resolving problems without having to go through or request the entire hearing process. Maybe you'll still get there, but there are many other ways that we hope are built into this language that help bring regional centers to the table to address people's needs without having to do the hearing to begin with.
Thanks, Will. Worknesh, you have had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question? Are you there? You can go ahead and unmute. All right, go ahead. We'll wait for you, Worknish, but go ahead, Ed, and ask another question.
Certainly. I have a question from M. Oh, we've already. Oh, this is just different enough that I'll ask it again. Is there direct support assistance funding available for clients to access the fair hearing process?
No,
Okay.
yeah, we just answered that. No, there isn't.
Got it. Will the rate, I have another question from Andrea. Will the rate increases be matched in the SDP? I know that we may have also addressed this, but there are a lot of folks who have asked this question, so I want to address it again.
Right. Yeah, the rate increases are at this time, I think it's probably regional center by regional center. Certainly for people who are going into the self-determination for the first time, the regional center is required to use the current rates to determine your budget. Okay, so really the question is for people who are already in the self-determination program, how can they be treating them differently than the people who are going in new? So there's a whole lot of really, to me, very clear issues that DDS is going to have to agree that the rates will need to be adjusted and people's budgets will be adjusted. You cannot treat people differently depending on which service system they're going into. Next question.
Thank you, Judy. My next question is from Carol. What are the current and then future hourly rates for support personnel?
Oh, so, we can't actually give you anything specific because it just depends on what service code they're under. If they're supported living versus personal assistant versus respite, it just really depends. So your regional center is required to show you what the rates are that they have been paying for you in the traditional system, or what they would pay for you even if you're already in the self-determination program. They're required to show you what their average rate is, or their rate is for a person like you. Of your level of need. So the rate, there's a 2,000 or 3,000 page study that goes over all these rates that I will not bore you with, but the rates are most of the rates are going up substantially. And so we are hopefully going to see the benefit of that in the self-determination program.
Thank you, Judy. My next question is from Debbie. How can we follow developments in the training efforts to address the recruitment and retraining of direct service providers, i.e. the funds going to DDS headquarters?
Yeah. Anybody want to take that? Mark, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I know Judy and I will be following it really closely. And I'm sure there'll be an SDP Connect on how folks can access those training stipends. But there is a significant amount of money going towards recruiting and retaining direct support professionals. As those processes get rolled out, certainly we'll be getting that to not only our CCL membership, but I know Judy will be getting it out to the SDP Connect community. So we're following it closely for you. So look forward for future topics that will address those.
And I would say too that for this particular initiative, many of you may be familiar with the large number of work groups that DDS has, right? They often have stakeholder work groups, subgroups to talk about different topics, and that meet periodically. Some of them are more formal than others. Some of the more formal ones, particularly ones required by statute, it's not easy to find info about what they're discussing, but you can find them eventually on the DDS website. They will at least post when the meetings are happening. happening and post PowerPoint slides or other handouts that, have useful information and that give updates on how certain initiatives are taking shape. And that can be helpful. But there are other work groups that are somewhat more informal that DDS has, and it's not always very public. It's not always clear or easy to find who is a member of that work group or how often or when they meet. And there is a workforce development group that DDS has been convening, but it is one of the more informal ones. So it is not very easy to figure out what information is going out to that work group. I know that there are a number of service providers, fortunately, and I'm on that work group. I'm not sure who else from the self-advocate or advocate community is on it exactly, but they have started to meet about this information. The other thing that you guys should keep in mind is that these training stipends and the internships are not the only things that are happening in this space in terms of workforce development. These are additional things. In addition to one thing that came out of last year's budget, which people sometimes forget, which is what DDS is calling DSP University. And that is another thing. DSP University is essentially, a training program where it's a certification kind of a thing where the idea is that there are 3 different tiers and that if staff go through this statewide training program. If you complete tier 1, then you would be eligible to get a little bit extra pay added onto your hourly rate as a DSP. If you completed tier 2, then you would get a little more. And if you completed tier 3, which is like an advanced level, the idea is that you should get paid a little bit more, right? The idea being that there's a way for staff to progress, right? It's what they call a career ladder. That is in development and it's not clear yet, right? Like exactly how it will work or what they will be training for, right? Like what are the things that the state of California expects people to be trained to? What are those, what is often called core competencies, right? That's all in the works. So yes, we will do our darndest to keep tabs. But if you're having difficulty keeping tabs, that's why.
Thanks, Vivian. Go ahead, Ed.
My next question is from, let me scroll here, is from Sherry. Can the client's rights advocates go to the fair hearings with the client or help them prepare for a hearing?
Yes, they definitely can, and that's important. So you definitely can still get help from a client's rights advocate or another attorney to help represent you at your hearing. The thing to know, though, is that if you do, then the regional center also has a right to be represented by its own attorney at hearing as well. And in addition to that, if you do have an attorney representing you, that attorney, there will be some stricter requirements that they will need to follow in terms of pre-hearing exchange of documents and things like that. So while those requirements are relaxed for those of you who would be appearing on your own without the assistance of an attorney, I think under these changes, the expectation is that if you do have someone representing you, that attorney will be held to a little higher standard in terms of like the legal stuff, right, that happens before a hearing.
Thanks, Vivian. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you, Vivian. I have another question from Melissa. If you just do the mediation request, then you might lose your right to appeal on the NOPA, the NOPA, the 60 days. I don't understand when it might make sense to request mediation.
Can address that one. Mediation needs to happen in 30 days from the day of the request. So, when you think about the timing, at least how I see it playing out, you try for mediation, maybe you get a good result, maybe you don't, you still have that time to request a fair hearing on the underlying notice of action. It will be interesting though, to see how, DDS operationalizes this section and how they modify the hearing forms to, really address what they say in the law is you got to do a informal hearing, mediation, informal meeting, mediation, fair hearing, or any combination of those 3. So I think we'll have to see how that gets implemented, but the short answer, Melissa, is the mediation happens in 60 days or 30 days, I'm sorry. So there's still some time.
Thanks. Alfredo, I'm going to let you ask the last question.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, I'd like to say thanks for this event because, like I always said, people inform is that's what we need. Is need information because sometimes we are misinformed. I better be no information at all if I'm gonna be misinformed. My question is because I was reading the amendment. It was made by the bill. What was the bill you just got? 10 SB 1092.
Yes.
And I was reading the part of the section 4701, parenthesis M, and it says, an explanation that a request for mediation may constitute a waiver of the rights of a medical home and community-based waiver participants to receive a fair hearing decision. For me, I think when it's been missed amendments parts, that the one that we don't have a representation, that the regional center can have no representation either. We got a very, very unfair trials because you know all the regional centers are well prepared. Everybody who goes there. The agencies and everybody. The only people who is not prepared is us as clients. And I like to know why those kind of parts can be amended, because to participate in this kind of fights, arguments or whatever, we have to give our rights to waiver over rights. I think it's not right. I think we deserve better treatment on these kind of situations because people is afraid to lose their rights. We don't know what kind of situation they got with their kids and they're gonna need services right away and they are into this situation. They prefer not to do anything. You know, I'm sorry to argue all the time when I go through these things, but for me, it's very unfair that a DDS knows better than us all this because they are the people who bring the money to the regional centers and they pass all this like it's nothing, you know, and believe me, the money who goes to the regional centers is to serve the people. He's not to serve the staff. He's not for the directors. He's not the people who is there receiving their money every week. And the parents with our kids, we're suffering for services. That's, you know, I'm sorry for that, but
Alfredo,
yeah.
I always love your questions and I always love your dialogue. Go ahead, Will. You'll have the last word because we got to end pretty soon.
Yeah, no, Alfredo, thank you for these comments. I just want to quickly address the provision that you put in the chat and called out. I think it was section 4701M that talks about a waiver of rights. That's in current law. So what it says is that, look, if you file for a fair hearing, you want to get a timely decision. You have things going on. You want those services. You want to win. So the system needs to give you that decision within 90 days, whether it's good, bad, whatever, right? But 90 days after you file that request, you need to get an answer about whether it's granted or denied. But what this law says is like, look, if you want to try to sit down and work it out the regional center and you think that you'll be able to do something good with them, you think that mediation will work, it's taking a little bit of time, you say, I don't have time for a hearing, this is good. You can say, I want to continue trying to work this out more informally. And by doing that, you say, okay, I'm okay with not getting my hearing decision in 90 days because I think I'm going to be able to work it out earlier. That's what that section says. It's current law. It's not being changed through this TBL or through our bill. But all the other points you're making, I think that's why we're here, right? We want to try to figure out how to make things more balanced, how to make things fair, how to level the playing field, how to, you know, I think tip this, not just level the playing field, but we know regional centers have all the expertise. So how do we even tip it a little bit more in your direction, right? So that it's easier, it's more equitable, it's fair. That's what all the other changes are trying to do. That's what the TBL is trying to do. And I think we're all committed to making sure that the rhetoric that DDS has put out, the changes in this TBL, it happens well. Or we'll be watching, right? We want it to happen the way that it's designed, and we want to level that playing field. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you for those comments.
Thank you. We've got to end. I'm so sorry, Alfredo and everyone, because we lose our Spanish and Korean interpreters 2 minutes ago. So we thank them for hanging on for a couple more minutes. I just want to thank our great panelists today, Vivian, Haun, Will Leiner, and Mark Melanson. You guys are amazing. We invite you to come back every week. We know you don't have time to be with us every time, but you see this amazing group of people we have. They're always giving information that makes you learn and makes you do your job better. So thank you, everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks. This next one's going to be a doozy. I have a feeling we're going to get 500 people at the next one, because we are having, I haven't planned it yet, but we are going to have a panel of FMSs. So we really got to work through the problems that FMSs are facing. So thanks, everybody. And the next one after that's going to have the new SDP ombudsperson, Susie Reckworth. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.